What would you do if the only way to protect the life you hold in your arms was to place it somewhere you could not control? Imagine that knot in your chest, the sound of your own breath loud in a small room, while outside the world is ordering death. This was Jochebed's choice, a mother pressed between terror and faith, facing a decision no parent should have to make. And in that terrifying obedience, she changed the course of her family's future and, ultimately, the destiny of a nation. The air in the little Levite home would have felt heavy with more than heat. It was heavy with the sound of soldiers' boots in the distance, with the whispered calculations of men trying to hide from a law that targeted sons. Pharaoh's decree cut through ordinary life like a blade. Every newborn Hebrew boy must be killed. It was a decree that turned homes into hiding places and turned the most sacred instinct to protect one's child at all costs into a moral battlefield. Amram and Jochebed knew the law's reach. They knew the risk. They also knew what kind of child might be growing in their house. When the baby was born, it was only outwardly a newborn. Jochebed, with a mother's intuition and a heart sharpened by prayer, saw a future and refused to hand that future to a death decree. For 3 months she kept him hidden. The image of those months is quiet and intense. Midnight hours bending over a sleeping infant. A mother watching his tiny chest rise and fall, counting each breath as a small miracle. Fear was constant, but so was a steady, stubborn work of hope. What does hope sound like when it hides? It sounds like a woman sewing by candlelight, plaiting reeds, testing seams, murmuring prayers between stitches. It sounds like a hand wrapping oilcloth around a child to keep warmth. It sounds like a mind that will not resign itself to impotence, that insists faith must have a body, that belief without planning is not bravery but wish. At some point, hiding alone was no longer enough. Exodus tells us the practical measure she took. But when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river's bank. Those words compress a world of feeling into a few sober details. A basket of bulrushes, pitch to seal it, the reeds bowing at the river's edge. Every element speaks of intelligence as much as love. A waterproofing to protect, a natural camouflage, a choice of place where the current might carry fate into providence. Picture Jochebed's hands shaping that basket. Not a reckless toss into the water, but deliberate engineering. She weaves, she seals, she thinks like a mother and like someone who must outsmart a power that has declared war on her children. This is not a tale of passive resignation. This is faith that acts. It is prayer accompanied by planning, pleading mixed with practical care. She does not say, "I will toss him and hope," but rather, "I will prepare what I can and entrust the rest to God." Of course, fear clenches at her throat in those moments. You can hear it in the small things. The way her hands tremble as she lays the child in the basket, the way she presses her cheek to his hair and names him in her heart before anyone else will. Miriam stands close, watching, young eyes steady despite the terror. A sister who learns courage by watching her mother. There is also the knowledge that what she does will be seen by others, that someone might notice the hiding place and report them. So she makes the choice not in a hurry, but in a moment of measured surrender. She hands the child not over to death, but into a current that could carry him to either danger or mercy. Then comes the wrenching moment every parent fears, the letting go. The river is a paradox, flowing, carrying, living water, and yet it is also a place where things disappear. Jochebed places the basket among the reeds. She does not push it hard or send it away. She lays it careful like a lover leaving a letter. And then she prays. Sometimes the record gives us only a whisper to hang on to, a brief, simple surrender. He is yours, Lord. Those 3 words are not a theological treatise. They are a lifeline. In them is both relinquishment and trust. Faith speaks in short sentences when a life is at stake. Miriam keeps watch from a distance. The text tells us she watched to see what would happen to him. Think of her, hidden in the reeds, the muffled sound of water, the pliant stems brushing her face, every sound amplified by fear. She is a young girl learning the weight of what it means to stand by a family's courage. Her obedience is a quiet counterpart to Jochebed's boldness. A sibling's vigilance becomes part of the plan. And then the current carries the basket outward, or the river's edge leaves it lodged just so. And Pharaoh's daughter, a princess who comes down to bathe, notices something unusual among the reeds. There is so much irony in the moment. The household that issued the death decree finds the very child it sought to destroy. Compassion does not obey political lines. It moves in the presence of a crying baby. When she opens the basket and sees the child, the scripture says she had compassion on him. In that compassion, the story bends. Here is where God's providence shows its peculiar, quiet strength. What looked like an ending turns into a beginning. The princess, moved by the child's cries, decides to keep him. Miriam, the quick-thinking sister, steps forward with a plan that itself reflects the same mixture of faith and wisdom her mother displayed. She approaches Pharaoh's daughter and offers to bring a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby. The princess consents, and Miriam brings back Jochebed. In a twist that must have felt like a paradox to Jochebed, the one who sent her son away is called back to nurse him under royal protection. The apparent loss becomes provision. The very power that sought to kill Hebrew boys unwittingly preserves the child and pays the woman who nursed him. This is not accidental sentimentality. It is a sober display of how providence can move through human decisions and even hostile systems. Jochebed's skillful action, her nerve, Miriam's courage, and the princess's compassion all converge under God's unseen hand. The scripture is careful to show human agency mingling with divine sovereignty. God is not a distant spectator who overrides human responsibility. He often works through it, and sometimes through the choices of those who do not know Him. Jochebed's return to nurse her own child is one of those small, profound mercies that shape futures. She nurses Moses, names him, Moses, drawn out, and plants seeds of identity and faith in the brief years she has with him. Proverbs 22:6 speaks to this kind of formative work. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. That training is not merely formal instruction. It is presence, story, small daily choices that form character. Jochebed's time with Moses is limited, but her influence is decisive. She does not need decades to imprint a love for God in a heart. She needs consistent, intentional moments. Decades later, that formative influence echoes. Hebrews 11 celebrates men and women who chose faith over comfort, and it specifically remembers Moses. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Hebrews 11:24, paraphrase. He chooses identification with his people, with their suffering and their God, rather than the fleeting ease of palatial privilege. How much of that refusal was planted by a mother's early disciplines and a mother's whispered prayers and songs? We cannot measure it precisely, but the arc between the reed-choked riverbank and the desert of Sinai is not a straight line. It is built of choices made by ordinary people with extraordinary courage. There is also a theological truth threaded through this story. God often uses what looks like loss as a means of accomplishing greater good. Romans 8:28 gives us a sober assurance that is not a formula but a promise, that God works all things together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. That does not mean every trauma is turned into immediate blessing, nor that pain disappears. It means that in God's overarching wisdom, even the darkest circumstances can be woven into a larger, redeeming design. Jochebed's tearful release becomes, in God's hands, the hinge for deliverance. What does this mean for us, especially for those who are parents or who stand before a decision that feels like a surrender? First, active faith is not a passive abandonment. Jochebed did not simply give up. She planned. She used her skills. She did what she could. Then she released the outcome to God. That pattern, prepare, act wisely, and in trust, is a biblical rhythm. Prayer without action is incomplete. Action without prayer is partial. The two belong together. When you face fear, ask God for courage, then do the next plausible, faithful thing with the resources you have. Second, time over quantity. Jochebed's influence came in the small window afforded to her. Parenting is not measured by uninterrupted decades alone. It is measured by formative presence, the stories we tell, the love we show, the values we embody. A few intentional years lived with intention can outsize decades of indifferent proximity. If you feel you have little time, remember that consistency and depth in the present can leave a lasting legacy. Third, providence often arrives in unlikely forms. God's means are not always predictable or immediately recognizable. The palace became a place of protection. The enemy's decree became an occasion for deliverance. Our circumstances may seem to hand us over to ruin, but God can turn them, sometimes using human actions that are bold and unconventional, sometimes using people who will not identify themselves as instruments of grace. Be alert to the surprising ways God can work and to the people He may use, even those who don't share your faith or values. There is a pastoral balance here. Do not convert this story into a promise that every act of faith will produce miraculous, immediate success. This is not a recipe. Jochebed's story is specific, rooted in a particular moment of history and divine purpose. Yet it is an example, a template of courage for ordinary people. The theological truth is sober and hopeful. God's sovereignty does not negate our responsibility. Rather, it invites our courage. And that courage is often practical, tactical, and tender at once. Let me ask you now, what is the basket you have been weaving in secret? What act of faith have you considered but not yet dared to undertake because fear seemed louder than hope? Maybe it is a conversation you need to have, a decision about a child, a step of obedience in your workplace or community, a release of control over something you love. The model Jochebed gives us is neither reckless nor paralyzed. She planned, she acted, and then she trusted. If this story is encouraging you, if it stirs something in your heart that says you can take the next step, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss other stories of faith. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder that fear and faith can coexist, and that courage can be practical. Now go back with me to that riverbank for a moment. Imagine Jochebed brought back to nurse her own son in the shadow of a palace, the smell of cedar and oil mixing with the scent of the Nile. Imagine the small lullabies she might have hummed, the whispered prayers that shaped a child's identity. Imagine a mother planting anchors of faith, a story of a deliverer in the making, a sense of belonging to a people, a trust that God is larger than palace and decree. These small anchors, repeated and stitched together, help explain why Moses could one day look at the choice of identity and make a countercultural decision to stand with his people. This is motherhood, or any act of loving stewardship as spiritual leadership. It is not always glamorous. It is often anonymous work at night, hands tired from labor, eyes heavy with worry. But it is formative. Jochebed's story is an invitation to remember that what we do in the hidden places matters. We are stewards of influence. We are not called to control the outcome, but to steward love faithfully. There is another layer to honor. Jochebed's faith was communal. Miriam watches, Amram supports, the princess acts. These are human threads that God weaves into His plan. We rarely act alone. Our courage empowers others. If you are feeling alone in a fearful place, look for the Miriam in your life, the friend who will watch with you, who will step into a delicate moment and speak life. And be a Miriam for someone else. Let's be honest, surrender is painful. Saying, "He is yours, Lord," costs something. Yet the very act of surrendering what we most treasure sometimes opens a door to a blessing we cannot foresee. The profound truth at the heart of this story, the truth I promised at the beginning, is this. When we face fear with a faith that prepares and then surrenders, we participate in God's larger story. Motherhood, and every act of loving surrender, can be the hinge on which God writes a greater future. What feels like a sacrifice in the moment may be the seed of deliverance across generations. So where does that leave us today? First, remember that acting in faith is both wise and brave. Make your plans prayerfully. Act with the resources you have. Release the outcome to God. Second, invest in the small, ordinary moments with your children, those daily acts of training that Proverbs says will follow them all their days. Third, expect God's providence to appear in surprising ways, through unexpected people, unlikely circumstances, perhaps even through the decisions of those who do not know Him. Before we close, I want to offer a brief benediction over the choices you face. May you have the courage to prepare, the wisdom to act, and the faith to entrust what you love to the God who holds the future. May you find unexpected help in the people around you, and may your small, faithful acts echo beyond what you can see. May fear not silence your obedience, and may surrender become the moment through which God begins something new. If this message touched you, share it with a parent or a friend who is making a hard decision. Leave a comment about which part of Jochebed's faith challenged you most. Was it her planning, her courage, her surrender, or the way God turned loss into provision?
I'd love to hear how this story resonates with your life. Go in peace, with courage to act and the calm to trust.